Right, so our first speaker this morning is the delightful Jan McHugh Smith. I won't read her bio out to you again because it is all available, of course, in the booklet. So will you put your hands together, please, and welcome Jan McHugh Smith this morning.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to be talking about cats again today. So for those of you who were here before, I think we'll hopefully be building on some of the information about what's going on with community cats in the United States. And I'll be speaking specifically about the shelter that we have in Pueblo, Colorado, which is in the very southern part of Colorado near the New Mexico border. And the program that we just instituted I think about 3 years ago, in Pueblo, Colorado, we have a very large population area where most of the density of the population is in the center of town in Pueblo proper, and it's about 160,000 people. But then there's a very agricultural surrounding area. It's a poorer area than the Colorado Springs area where we have our other shelter, and we have 42% Hispanic folks and 53% white, and the average median income is $41,000. But what's really interesting about this area is that it has a really high intake for the number of people that are living in that area, and I think it's because there are not a lot of services available out in the more rural parts of the county. In 2000, this is actually a really unique situation because the county and the city of this place owns the shelter. They actually own the building, and they went in cooperatively and built the shelter themselves. But then they hired the Humane Society of the Pikes Peak region to actually do all of the animal sheltering and all of the animal management or animal control process. So we're working inside the building that we don't own, but we have a very cooperative relationship with the city and the county, and we're providing all of the services, including services such as low-cost spay and neuter for the public pets. It's a new building that was built in 2007. We were asked to come in and take over because they were going to be shut down by the state when the government was running it because of the poor conditions that were in the old building and the way the animals were being cared for. We're taking in about 3,200 cats annually between the period of 2007 and 2010. And unfortunately, most of those cats ended up being euthanized. We had an in-house surgery center, and we have one veterinarian and some staff members who support her, and that person was hired in 2009, which finally gave us the capacity to start making some change. We don't get funded adequately by the government to run this agency, so it's a constant battle, and I know John will be talking later on about contracts, but this is a community where every year we have to renew this contract and fight for enough funding to be able to keep this place running at the level of service that our organization wants to provide. So we also have donor subsidy. So we have donors who are helping to support the work of our agency down in Pueblo. And when we're talking about trap, neuter, return, and also return to field or SNR, spay, neuter, release, we are talking about programs that are being sponsored by either grants or donations and not tax-funded dollars. We tend to be understaffed in this area. It's very difficult to get employees. We have very low wages, and like I said, our euthanasia rate for cats was deplorable at 73%. But you can see that the intake per capita was very high, so almost 57 animals per 1,000 people. And this is, again, a community of 161,000 folks. So we really had a big mess on our hands that we were going to try to fix, so to speak. So in August of 2011, we, as an animal control agency, stopped picking up cats, and it's something John talked about. Our agency did pick up both dogs and cats, and we just stopped doing it. We talked to the local government and said, this is, a lot of resources going into this. These cats are just ending up being euthanized. The public could still bring in cats if they wanted to bring or drop off a stray or a lost cat, but we would not go out in the field and actually pick them up if we call them cats in custody, where somebody may have picked up a cat and had the cat in the home. Then we began TNR was illegal. There was a law that in our community only allowed for so many pets to be in a household, and we were not allowed to do TNR, so we had to start going to our council and talking to them about the merits of the TNR program and trying to get a law passed that would make it possible for us to legally do TNR. And I know that's the situation you are in right now, where it is illegal. And because we were, have a government contract, we did not want to go behind their backs and do it under the radar, but really wanted to make sure that we could set up a proper format that the government agreed to, that our citizens could get behind, and that we as an agency could do legitimately. And so we were really excited when we were able to get a law passed that allowed us to do trap, neuter, return. And it was a law that said we had to have established colonies. We would actually permit them. So we would have a staff person go out, look at the situation, talk to the colony caregiver. They would provide a signature saying that they would provide certain standards of care for the cats in their colony. And we would provide free sterilization for those cats, and they would make the effort to trap those cats and bring them into the facility. And we would go out periodically and do checks. And also, every year, they were required to report what was going on, because we wanted to see if we could measure the decrease in the number of cats in the colonies as time went on. So we decided to do targeted TNR, which meant that instead of just doing TNR for anybody that happened to make a phone call to us, we picked a zip code, one very specific area, and that was based on the intake of animals into our shelter, the intake of cats specifically. So we targeted the area where we were getting the most cats brought into the shelter. And this was really important because it allowed us to really contain and measure and run a pilot to see how effective are we being. In Colorado Springs, we had a TNR program, and we were doing it very widespread, and it was very hard for us to measure the effectiveness of that program. So we wanted to make sure that we were targeting. We also provided an option for sterilization of cats that had families, and we did return to field. And return to field is the single cat that maybe somebody is feeding in their backyard. That cat is unsterilized, there's no colony, there's no owner specifically for that cat, and the community cat could be at risk for making more babies. So we would allow people to bring those cats in, we would sterilize them for free, and then we would take that cat back exactly where that cat came from, where it was found. And so that was a big part of trying to make sure we're capturing all the different populations, the owned cats, the stray cats, and then the community cats that may or may not be feral. So when we looked at cat ownership, we looked at it as a spectrum where, we had the indoor cat that was owned all the way to, what we would consider really feral cats. In Pueblo, I remember we were trying to pass a tax to increase the support for the shelter, and we were going door to door knocking and talking to people, and I swear I had a little posse of cats following me down the back. It was the most amazing thing. There are so many cats in Pueblo, and so it was really, for me, it really made me understand, oh my gosh, this is a huge problem here, and we really need to figure out a way to solve this. But you can see the range is, there's a real range of animals, and there are also animals that people don't own, but they're definitely taking care of them. And they may not consider them a pet that they would let into the house, but they feel ownership towards that pet. They want to protect that animal. And so, we looked at this whole range, and we said, bottom line is that, they're actually, the most cats we saw were community cats. They were semi-friendly. Or, maybe you couldn't pick them up, but they would come close to you. They weren't going to rip your face off. So we decided that, no matter what, we wanted to hit the whole spectrum in this zip code that we had chosen for our program. So again, we had no funding, but we went and started to solicit grants once we had a legal law that allowed us to do this. And we got funding to hire one person who is our coordinator. And her job was basically to go bang on doors in this neighborhood, this zip code area, and try to find out what's going on in there. We talked earlier about how sometimes feral cat colony managers can be secretive because they're worried about getting busted. The relationship with animal control can be one that's controversial, or antagonistic because they were worried about being busted for having too many cats. So basically we had to have a person that was very, very friendly, that understood and could speak the language of our feral cat colony managers and really reach out to them and build that trust. And that was a really important part of this program, having that person. And then once you could establish trust with one or two of these feral cat colony managers, it was much easier to reach out to the others because the word started to get out, especially when you do free spay and neuter, which they really wanted to comply with. So they would we'd have them fill out an application. We would do a site inspection. If they needed to clean up some areas, they would do that. We made sure that there was property ownership was allowing it to happen, that they would do annual census. The colony manager would provide the food, water, and medical care. And we would provide traps if they needed them. But mostly this is really about community involvement because we had one person getting these folks engaged and helping us by bringing the cats in and not us being out there trying to trap all these cats. And then also providing mediation in the neighborhoods when there were conflicts around cats and how many cats were in the neighborhood. If somebody didn't like cats, how do we help them understand the program? And also, how do we help them do determents? And so we actually provided supplies for people that wanted to keep the cats off their property. And we did that for free. So this is Pueblo, and we used Chameleon, and we were able to keep track and create maps to look at where are the colonies. And we were making sure that when every cat went out, the cat was microchipped and ear-tipped. And if the microchip came in, and it was an ear-tipped cat, we would identify that cat and take it back to that colony. So we were able to really map out what was going on and trying to keep track of how many cats are in each different area. So statistics in 2012, we had 1,794 live cat intakes from all the areas, and we did over 1,400 trap neuter returns, and we did 1,060 in our targeted zip code. We had 100 colony managers, and that program cost us $132,000. The next year, we had 1,669 live cat intakes from all areas, and we did over almost 1,800 TNRs with almost 1,100 targeted spay neuters in a different zip code that we targeted, with 170 colony cat managers, and we were able to return to field 64 cats. So we started doing a lot more focus on when cats were coming in, the single cats were coming in, trying to get them out, and then also having people who are TNR colony managers help us trap these single community cats or encourage their neighbors to trap them so we could get them sterilized as a part of the program. And when we were getting cats into the shelter that were single community cats, we were doing a body assessment for those to make sure that the cats were in good body form, that they appeared healthy, and that cat would immediately go into our surgery center. We would do the surgery and let that cat recover. That cat was microchipped, ear-tipped, vaccinated, and then we have volunteers on our team who would actually take those cats back out to where the cat was found. And we have a van, I'll show you later on, that really it looks like a cat. And then in 2014, again, you can see the numbers of the live cat intakes are starting to really drop. And we continue to do many TNR surgeries. And colony caregiver managers, our numbers continue to increase as the word gets out. And each time we did a different zip code, and then we were tracking from the very first zip code to the third zip code, how are we doing in terms of the intake for those areas? And what we saw was a really dramatic drop in the number of kittens coming into our shelter very quickly. And again, I don't know if that's a trend, but for sure we've seen the decrease in the number of cats coming in and the number of kittens coming in from the areas where we did very targeted TNR. So here's our live cat intakes from 2003 to 2014. So you can see there's a pretty dramatic drop, almost 1,000 cats, more than 1,000 cats that were coming into our facility, decreasing those cat numbers, which was wonderful because, again, when you start to see those numbers decrease, you can start using those resources for other needs. And then here's a graph that talks about our live cat intakes and our euthanasia. So also you can see that our euthanasia dropped dramatically. Well, obviously, if you have less cats coming in, there are less, less cats that you're needing to process through your building and get adopted out, or unfortunately have to euthanize at times. But it was a really dramatic drop in euthanasia for us when we were able to keep these cats from coming into the shelter. And then trap, neuter, return, and SNR, or return to field. The return to field cats were a really big help because those single cats before used to be at risk for euthanasia, but now when they came in, if they weren't an adoption candidate, we could assess them with a body scoring and then make sure that they got out of the building alive instead of being at risk for euthanasia. So I think the most important part of this program was the ability to mediate, to have somebody on the ground who's banging on doors, who's helping people to talk about the program and educate people. Not everybody wanted the cats to come back. So having this information and talking to people in your community was really important. And also, we had a lot of media coverage. We had TV crews go out and see cats get trapped and go through the process. And we certainly had people who were opposed to this, but we were able to at least tell our side of the story in a very positive light about the positive outcomes and the decrease in euthanasia for shelter cats. And we think that the targeting is really the way to go because we've done both, and the most impact we've seen has been through targeted, where you're doing both. You're doing trap, neuter, return, and doing return to field and owned cats. So we would also, when we were in that neighborhood, we were soliciting cats that were unsterilized to get sterilized. And we have a little mobile spay-neuter van that we would drive out and be able to actually go into the neighborhood to try to remove the barrier of transportation issues, which was an issue that was definitely a problem in our community. So we would do those sterilizations at little or no cost. We found that we had the best response when there was no cost. Even when we just said we'd do it for $10, the response was so much lower than when we said we would do it for free. So people love for free, don't we all? And then the most important thing, and this is because we do animal control, we also have to make sure that we're working within the laws because of our government contracts, and because philosophically we want to make sure that we're all aligned with the care and well-being of cats. So we have to work very closely. And unfortunately, we have situations where people become cat hoarders, and they may be a colony manager, and at that point we have to revoke their colony manager status, and then we have to go in and try to clean up that mess. And it's very important that you're checking in on those colony managers, especially if you suspect that somebody may be a hoarder. And we have quite a few hoarder situations in both Colorado Springs and Pueblo. And when they're involved, when they're mixed in with the TNR program, it becomes pretty complicated because these folks in their mind think that they're sanctioned no matter what. And it's very clearly stated in our agreement with them that they're not sanctioned to be neglectful or cruel to animals. So. And I think again, the return to field where we're taking these single cats out, we were really careful about the situations we put these cats in at first because we were worried about, we do have guns in Colorado and people do use them. We didn't want any cats being poisoned or shot, and we were really trying to make sure that we were putting these cats back into a situation that was safe. So we did a campaign to try to raise publicity, and the first time we did the campaign, we actually offered to give a donation to their favorite charity of $1,001. So the zip code was 81001. So the goal was to do 1,001 cats, and we would do a 1,001 donation to their favorite charity for the person who helped us to bring in the most cats. And so we were trying to encourage, again, the community to get involved and to become trappers and to take on colony management. So we had a really fun time with that. We had 3 people competing, with cat trapping, which sometimes it can be hard to find volunteers to do that. And we did it. We dropped the contest for the prize let's see, this was 2014, I think. Yeah, 2014. But again, we did billboards. When we'd go into a zip code, we actually had cards that were very similar to this billboard, and we would mail them out. So we did very targeted mailing to let people know we were coming, what was going to happen, and what the possibilities were for them, encouraging people to call us. So we would do a mailing, and then our CAT coordinator would get a lot of phone calls and saying, you know, oh, I have this problem, or my neighbor has this problem, and can you come in and help us with that? This is the caddy wagon. and again, we really wanted to make sure we were focusing on getting that message out about what we were doing. We didn't want to do this under the table, and you know, once the law was passed and it was legal for us to do this, we wanted to make sure people understood about what we were doing. So you see the cat face on the front hood there, or you call it the bonnet. But it was really fun to drive through the neighborhoods, and it was called the caddy wagon because the very first one we had was an old, what we call a paddy wagon, where in the old days they used to put drunk guys in the back, and it had a little cage back there for people. And so the sheriff's department donated it to us, and we would go around in the paddy wagon, which some people in the neighborhoods recognized. And they're like, what are you doing? So we were glad when we were able to get a van and upgrade a little bit and really be able to talk to the community. Again, it created visibility around what's going on with cats, why cats are important, and then what we can do to help them in the community. So our lessons learned, the most important thing I've learned from doing these programs is that it's really necessary to have structure and to have guidelines and expectations for the people who are providing colony care management, or and to be very upfront with people when they're bringing in a cat, and that cat is going to be participating in a return to field program or an SNR program. So when a cat comes in and a person's, we try to have a conversation with them, oh, that's open. We say, well, so they're like, oh, I found this cat. Well, tell me more about that. What's going on with this cat? How long has he been hanging out in your neighborhood? And he's like, oh, well, you know, he's been there for 6 months, and like, well, so tell me, is there, you know, what kind of behavior have you been dealing with? And he's like, well, I'm so sick of this cat. He's been jumping on my car, and, you know, trying to get the person to really talk about what the issue is and why they're bringing that cat in. And then saying, well, you know, what we're going to do is this cat is probably going to end up coming back and it'll be neutered, and here's some things we can provide for you to support keeping the cat off your car if that's the problem that he was having. Or if the cat is getting into their kid's sandbox, you know, how can we help them to make that diversion? But we're very upfront about it, and as John had talked about yesterday, they signed a document saying that this cat could potentially go up for adoption, it could potentially be returned or potentially euthanized. But we're very upfront about that conversation with them, and we try to keep it very open-ended so that we can understand better why that cat is actually being brought into us. And having that TNR coordinator position was very key to our success because of the relationships that she was able to build and make sure that people the word was getting out about the program and helping us to spread the word in that zip code area. We also had a relationship with the council person for each of those zip codes and got their support, and we were going to community meetings and talking about the program and getting the public more informed about what was going on. Mediation, when you're having neighborhood disputes around cats, again, the TNR coordinator needs to be skilled in that. And then marketing, getting the word out that it's happening. And again, you know, we did it very inexpensively. We had postcards that we would send out to direct mail lists that are targeted in that area. And volunteers, you know, Pueblo really struggles with getting volunteers. It's not an easy thing for us to do, recruit volunteers. But we had some very, very dedicated volunteers who come into the program. And so, you know, what I call the tender loving care for our volunteers is a really critical piece to keep them engaged and help them to see the results of what they're doing. And so sharing with them the statistics on the animals coming in, the animals at risk for euthanasia, being very transparent about how this program is making a positive effect for cats. So that data collection piece is also essential. And in Colorado, we have a state law where shelters, rescues, everybody who is licensed to do animal rescue has to report their statistics. And this is a very important piece because if you don't measure what's going on, how can you manage it, right? So what gets measured gets managed, and We have to report that back to the state, and people, the general public, can go onto their website and take a look at our stats. And even though, at one point we had a very high euthanasia rate, it was important for our public to understand it because it helped our council to see the benefits of taking on a law that would allow us to do TNR. And that's it. Thank you.